So to start, you need a piece of paper, you need a messy mat, and you need some blue tape. You also need a pencil to write your name on the back before you get started, especially because we're going to be taping our paper down to our mat as well to give it a border around the edge of the paper. And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So my name is on the back and I flipped my paper over, and now we can begin using the tape. The first thing we're going to do is tape our paper down to the messy mat. The reason we're doing this is to create a border or a blank edge around our painting, which will frame it nicely. So I'm taking the tape and I'm going to take a long piece, and then I'm just going to put it down around the edge of my paper, and I'm trying to make it even so that it's going at as much of a straight line as I can get it. And then I can rip it off, turn my paper, and do the other sides. Now that I have tape all around the edges, the next thing to do is to break up the paper with tape. So we're going to create sections for different watercolor techniques and colors to go. You can place the pieces of tape in any direction or arrangement that you like, but you should end up having about 11 or 12 different sections. You could have more than that, but at least that many. I'm doing mine at some different angles, and I'm trying to rip the tape off evenly so that there isn't a rough edge sticking out into a section. I want to have some clean, straight lines. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I need to break this up a lot more. I want to bring the tape all the way to the edges where I created that border at first. Once your paper is broken up into sections and you're happy with your design, make sure all the tape is pressed down onto the paper. You don't want any air bubbles underneath the tape because the tape is going to resist the watercolor that we'll be adding. And when you take off the tape, you'll end up with white lines where the tape was. So you can go ahead and get your watercolor supplies now. You'll need watercolors, a water cup, and a paintbrush. You already have your messy mat, a paper towel or a tissue for blotting, and then we can also use some crayon for a wax resist and sprinkle a little bit of salt on our watercolor to create a cool effect. Remember when you're using your watercolors that we want to keep them clean so that we can see all of the colors and that we don't end up with any colors with other colors on top of it. So make sure that every time you are using a color, you are cleaning your brush. The one that always gets the dirtiest is yellow, so be extra careful around yellow. So if I'm using this blue here, I would paint with blue all the way to where the tape is. It's okay if a little bit of the watercolor goes on the tape because the tape will resist the watercolor. It should not go underneath the tape. Then if I need to use a new color, I should be cleaning off my brush so that I can get that new color without getting another color on it. So I'm using violet now and putting that inside of the blue. Let's say that I don't like the way that this is turning out. I can take just a little bit of water on my brush, paint around with it just a little bit where I don't like the way it's turning out, and I can use my paper towel or tissue to blot that color, and most of it should come off. Now this is a blue, it's a darker color, so I can still see some blue, but I could easily paint over that with a color and I wouldn't be able to see it that much underneath. So maybe I wanted to change that to be pink. For the crayon, you can draw in the section before you add paint with any kind of design that you'd like. I'm using a white crayon, so it's not showing up right now, but if I feel my paper, I can tell that I have added crayon because you feel a little bit of a waxy texture. For mine, I'm just doing straight lines that follow the shape, so it's following this triangle shape. Remember when you're using watercolors to just swirl your brush around on the color to wake it up so that it will work, and then the more water you have, the more easily your brush will move around on your paper. If it starts to make a scratchy noise, that means that you need more water for it to work the right way. Notice that you can see the lines that I made with the crayon through the paint. So that is called a wax resist because crayons are made of wax. The more water I add, it might cover some of the white crayon, so I'm going to try to paint lightly here so that it shows through. I'm also going to add a little bit of the dark blue using the wet on wet technique because this lighter blue was already wet. So I can go ahead and add in another color and it will bleed and blend together. Now for the salt, you would want to paint with the color that you want to use. So I'm going to use purple in this section and I'm going to blend some other colors into it, but I'm just doing a light wash of purple and then I'm going to add some other colors to it. So this is using the wet on wet technique because I'm adding water into an already wet area of my paper. So while this is still wet, I'm going to add a little bit of salt on top. So I'm just taking a pinch of salt with my fingers and sprinkling it on that section of my paper. I'm going to let the salt sit there and dry, and it will soak up some of the color and create a really cool spotted effect. So that's gonna stay there until the painting is dry. I'm gonna go ahead and paint in the other sections. In some of the sections, I've used the wax resist and drawn crayon, and then in others, I'm going to use the salt. And then in some of them, I'm not going to use anything, but you can decide which techniques you want to use on your art. Once you've finished painting all of the sections, then you're going to leave the tape on until your painting is completely dry. So you should take your painting with the messy mat attached to it and put it on the drying rack. I hope you had fun experimenting with the different watercolor techniques and creating an abstract design using the lines made from the tape.